Hey everybody, it's DJ here with the Monarchy Gamers looking at episode 2 of the Starcraft 2 School of Pain. Almost said House of Pain. That's something totally different, I'm sure. Alright, today we are looking at a match between Protostitute and Popcorn. By the way, Protostitute is the best name ever, even though he's not actually playing the Protoss. Alright, sorry this took so long, guys. I've been having a few computer issues. I've actually got my power cord wrapped around my laptop right now because for some reason it has to be at a specific angle and at the maximum amount of tension you can possibly imagine just to work. Alright, so we're going to start this matchup. Popcorn up here in the upper left Protoss, Protostitute in the lower right Terran, even though that's completely weird. Alright, we're going to fast forward a little bit because last time we focused a little bit on Terran versus Zerg and Baneling versus Marauder relationship, but we also talked a lot about knowing your enemy's army composition versus just knowing their general strategy. Specific composition, that is. So this time we're going to be looking at something that also applies to all the races and looking at it a little bit more general. And then we're going to go a little bit more specifically into how it applies to Zerg. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is static defense and how you should not really use it. We're going to look at one really bad example of static defense and then one really good example of it, and we're just going to end up seeing quite a bit of action revolving around specifically, and I don't want to give it away, but specifically around Photon Cannons and around Spine Crawlers and a couple of other specific units that are a little bit different. Alright, so typical openings here. Got one barracks, one factory going down. Terran went for a fast expand. Protoss, as you can see, has already gotten a forge down, and here come those Photon Cannons I was talking about. 4 of them. Let's take a look here at this economy right now. Just now reaching 2 workers per mineral patch. Just got his gas up. No upgrades researching. No gateway units in sight. He's getting 4 cannons. This right here, this is 600 minerals. That is 6 zealots, 5 stalkers. I mean, I'm gonna keep playing here because there's not actually a lot of action toward the beginning of this. But no matter how you slice it, using photon cannons is a terrible way to defend your base. Now, granted, there was some Reaper aggression here, but those cannons weren't even up and attacking him. In fact, he ends up having to use one shot from that cannon right there. That was the only cannon that hit that Reaper the entire time. And he just keeps building more this entire time. 2 Stargates. He's actually, if you can't tell, going for 1 base air, which is terrible for Protoss because you almost never have enough resources to crank out voids at a sustainable rate. But that's beside the point. All these resources right here, he's now up to 9 photon cannons, I believe. That is well over 1,000 minerals. It's almost 1,500. He could have easily spent all that on 2 more gateways and a ton of units. Meanwhile, Terran down here, sitting on 2 bases, massing Marines and Ravens. There's not even that many units here, really. If he had enough Zealots, he could probably charge right through these and at least take out this Expo. Meanwhile, guess what? Terran, adding on 2 more bases. He will now be sitting on 4 bases. What's the Protoss doing? Sitting in his base behind this wall of cannons. Now I'm going to slow it down a little bit more because I want to talk about the problem here. The biggest problem is that he just got his expansion. You see so much play, especially at lower levels where, well, actually only at lower levels because the higher level players know better than this, but you see so much play where people will just build cannons and say, okay, he can't attack my base now, I'm going to build an army. That is the worst thing that you can do in this situation because, for one thing, you're building units so slowly. These Void Rays are 4 supply, and he has, what, 7 of them? Versus all these Marines, all these Vikings, all these Ravens, and he just keeps adding on. The person with the most income wins in long-term games. It's that simple. Maybe you can win if you counter their units. Maybe you can win if you tech up faster than they do. But there is no way you can overcome a 2 to 4 base advantage, assuming that your opponent has any idea what he's doing, or you don't come up with some ridiculous late-game cheese. Right now, these 3 photon cannons at the Expo, maybe 1 or 2, most likely 1 or 2 to defend that Expo. Up here, this 1 at the mineral line, good. This second one at the mineral line would be good if it was in a better location. Everything else except for maybe 1 or 2 at the entrance. Maybe 1 or 2. Completely unnecessary. And the worst part is, it's not so much in this game, but just in general, players who build this wall will just fall back behind it and think they're invincible. They won't focus as much as they need to on building units and teching up. His fleet beacon just now going down. And so he's going to think that because he has all these cannons and all these void rays, he's basically invincible, when Terran is probably the worst race to build against for air. Usually they're going to have marines, they're going to have a ton of them, they're going to have stim pack, they're going to have medevacs, and if they have medevacs, they almost always have a reactor, which means they can just crank out Vikings. And here's the other problem with having this wall of cannons. Instead of defending his expo, he falls behind the Photon Cannon line, thinking that he's better off there. Now, granted, the Void Rays would have been next to useless against this army right here, but it's still, you see it a lot of times where people could have easily defended their expo. Granted, they would have taken heavier losses than they do behind the Photon Cannons, but they just abandon their defensive lines in favor of the cannons. Also, here's why I love Ravens. I never see Raven play, it seems like, and I just love seeing Seeker missiles decimate an entire army. This is what happens when A, you go entirely air, but B, when you focus too much on pouring all of your income into these cannons. You have nothing mobile. He was down to 1 Void Ray out of that army, and 2 more cranked that he just cranked out, I mean. Now, this is pretty abysmal for Popcorn. I mean, the supply difference is now tripled. His pylons are all dead. He's basically screwed here. And these cannons are next to worthless against this massive number of marines. I mean, look how fast those go down. It's not even worth the 150 minerals. Zealots would be of more use to him at this point, even with the battle cruisers on the field. And he can crank out more Void Rays, but at this point it's really not even worth the effort. It's GG, and he knows it, and he calls it right there. And that brings us to the end of the game. Now, I'm not saying static defense is always a bad thing, but again, if you look at high-level games especially, you'll notice these 2 turrets right back here at the mineral line, and this one would not be in this location, because unless he was afraid of a drop coming in which case it might be placed slightly out in this direction, but this was just way overkill on the Photon Cannons. There were, I believe, a total of around 13 before they all started getting completely obliterated. It was somewhere around there, and most of them were focused right around this entrance. Guess what? If a group of Marines, or even Marauders, or you know, whatever, Banshees even he could bring in, come down here, they target this one, this Photon Cannon, maybe this one, and probably not that one, are all that are going to be able to attack the units in this area. And they're going to tear down these Photon Cannons one by one by one. And they're going to come up here and do the same thing to this one, this one, this one, this one. And then they're going to move into the base and destroy everything, making these Photon Cannons pretty much useless, especially since there is 1 pylon powering most of this area with these 2 as backup. Photon Cannons are something that people wall off and just assume they're going to destroy the enemy army, when in reality any moderate amount of positioning is going to allow you to completely destroy them one by one with no unit losses. Alright, so that was game 1. That was very, very bad static defense, and I'm not going to lie, that was overall not a very good Protoss player, and I'm putting that nicely. You know, his supply was bad, his expansions were not great, you know, he was just outplayed in a lot of ways. I just highlighted it because I especially did not like the static defense. It just irks me. You see it so much and it's so easy to counter. All you have to do when your opponent builds static defense is expand, and you win the game. Unless he somehow manages to build static defense and you expand so much that you have no army, then you're pretty much okay. And if you're doing that, then you need to work on your, you know, expansion skills and macro. Alright, this is a game between, once again, Protostitute and Little Man, and I chose this one partially because it was Protostitute again, and I absolutely love that name, but also because this is Protostitute showing us that he can not only counter static defense, but he can use it to its full power. Now, we're going to notice that he's going for an early expand, very easy, very zergy. Meanwhile, Protoss over here, building a couple of gateways, nothing extravagant yet. Hence why I'm moving it faster ×8. The problem with static defense, honestly, is that there's not a lot to show at the beginning of the video. But we're going to see in here, just in a minute, he's sending a queen out. All the way across the map. And that thing moves slow, so I'm just going to leave it at faster ×4 because it's still ridiculously slow. He's got this Overlord here. He has all of 2 Zerglings and a Queen over here. Now, what could he be planning? There's absolutely no way a Queen and 2 Zerglings could take on this army, and what are these drones doing? Oh, those are spine crawlers. 3 spine crawlers so far. 4 now. Oh dear. Well, what could be possibly going on here? This is basically the Zerg equivalent of a cannon rush, but it's so much deadlier. And I know this is cheese, but I absolutely had to put this in because I love it, and guess what? I skipped past the production of it, but you can see up there, and you probably did actually while you were watching, swarm hosts, greatest static, non-static defense in the game, pretty much. 3 units going in here, shredding through these zealots, absolutely cost efficient. 0 mineral loss by Protostitute, but now Little Man's army is basically confined to this tiny little area. And look at the supply difference already. Protostitute actually doing very good this game. But beyond just doing good, he is actually moving these into very good positions. And now we see why Zerg's static defense is so ridiculously overpowered compared to the other races. Granted, spine crawlers can attack air, but with these swarm hosts moving into position, I don't know why I have to highlight everything I talk about. With these swarm hosts moving into position, now all he really has to do is uproot these spine crawlers, move them forward, plant them closer to the end of the line. And anytime these stalkers come in and try to take out the swarm hosts or try to take out the spine crawlers, there's going to be spine crawlers attacking them, and there's going to be locusts coming in just a few seconds. There is literally almost never a gap between locust waves. I mean, there's a little bit of one, but not enough to move that army into position before they're already spawning again. Now he's bringing out Zerglings, he's putting out Queens, he's building a 3rd base right here. He has control of the game right now. Complete control. These Zerglings and Locust combinations are shredding the front waves of his army. The only thing, in fact, that he isn't destroying is that mothership core because he can't attack air. Everything else going to be absolutely obliterated. These Locusts moving in. I mean, just look at this. Zero really minerals lost here. Granted, he has lost a few, but for the most part, Protostitute is in just a killer position here. Absolutely destroying his opponent's base. He's slowly creeping in to take out those gateways, take out this Immortal. I mean, that's an expensive unit right there, and those Locusts are just practically made for shredding it. Nothing really that Little Man can do here. He is getting this powered up, photon overcharged Nexus here, and he does have his mothership core, and he's actually doing the smart thing here, getting Void Rays. But just look at how ridiculous this is getting. 4,000 resources lost by Little Man, 800 still by Protostitute. His mineral loss count has not moved since he sent in those Zerglings. He's just advancing this wall of spine crawlers with every second. Now, granted, he could have used a couple more spore crawlers. I mean, the mothership core has been out there for basically forever, but he knows he can protect it because this is the greatest combination in the game. The spore crawler, meet Queen, and now his air can't do anything. Mothership core is down, and that Void Ray is going to have to run away. Meanwhile, these Locusts have utterly destroyed the front lines of his base, and he has 2 Void Rays out now. 2, but there's just so many Locusts that they're absolutely worthless. Moving those swarm hosts forward, he knows that once he gets them down, the Void Rays won't be able to do anything. He doesn't even get the first swarm host, and now spine crawlers are moving forward. Making basically a little arc here to just slowly push into his base. That's his whole strategy here. This is basically the equivalent of cannon rushing, bunker rushing, you know, whatever. But it's so much deadlier because he doesn't have to rebuild a single one of these spine crawlers. Spine crawlers are basically a sort of artillery army unit. I mean, look at this supply unit. It is now 51 to 103 supply, and most of that is in these swarm hosts, honestly. But there's nothing that can be done here. His army just keeps replenishing itself, moving forward, and now he's taken out the Nexus at the Expo, Natural Expo. And we're just going to fast forward because basically just the same thing happens up here at the main base, slowly creeping forward. He does get this in here. Having that observer is absolutely a good move, because now he can start destroying the swarm host, but as soon as he brings these in here, guess what? Corruptors. Protostitute is definitely a smart player thinking ahead there. And he's bringing in about 24 of these because just as these void rays start to destroy swarm hosts, start to destroy creep tumors, they think, oh hey, I've got this, I can come back. His army cannot possibly handle these. Oh lord, what are those purple things in the sky? And suddenly his entire void ray army is basically worthless because, I mean, just a handful of corruptors can utterly destroy these void rays. And just an annihilation. That's all I can really say. Supply difference now triple, and at this point, Little Man's basically realized the game is over. There's nothing he can do against this. Now, this is actually the best place for static defense. If you want to put a big line out at the front of a base, put it at the front of your opponent's base, because there is nothing, absolutely nothing that they can do about it. Unless, of course, you let them get the advantage early on. Now, I recognize that that was a little bit cheesy, but I included it because I wanted to show just how important it is to have a mobile army. We saw in game 1 he put up static defense and used it to let himself get lazy. He got complacent, and in the end that took the game away from him. In the second game, they built static defense, but they used it like an army. Protostitute was able to move into his opponent's base, control him, keep him at 2 bases instead of keeping himself at 2 bases with static defense, and in the end, that basically won him the entire game. Okay, so in summary, static defense is, it's I won't say it's good to use, but it's okay to use as long as you moderate yourself. You have to know where to put it down, where it's going to be most important, and where that 100 or 150 minerals is going to make the biggest difference. And if you're going to use it, you have to make sure that you have an army that can sustain and can defend if that line breaks down. Using something like siege tanks is amazing for static defense because you can turn it into an army. Using spine crawlers, using swarm hosts, amazing because you can turn it into an army. Protoss are really the only ones that don't have true static defense that's at least a little bit mobile, but that's okay. You just have to learn how to put pressure on your opponent, and static defense is the exact opposite of pressure. You're just letting your opponent know, hey, I can expand. He's probably not going to come out from behind this massive line of cannons or missile turrets or bunkers or siege tanks that he just spent thousands of minerals building. You're basically telegraphing to your opponent what you're going to do just as much as if he had scanned your base. You're showing him exactly what your plan is, and your plan isn't really all that solid. Alright guys, no pressure here. Comment, like if you liked the video. I won't force you to do something you didn't want. This is all consensual liking going on over here. And hopefully I will see you on part 3. Once again, haven't decided what the next topic is going to be. If you have any ideas, leave it in the comment section and I'll check it out. If you have any replays you want me to look at, send those to monarchygamers@gmail.com in an attachment and I'll look through them. Alright, see you guys.